Good afternoon. My name is Weichao Yuwen. I'm a faculty member in the Nursing and Healthcare Leadership Program. Today, I wanted to talk about a project that was funded by the Office of Global Affairs Global Innovation Fund this year. And I want to start with a personal story. So I was born and raised in China, and I grew up in a generation that everybody is the only child in their family. So when I came to the States over a decade ago, and when people found out that I am the only child in my family and all my friends and siblings are like that, they always respond like, "Oh, I'm so sorry, you must feel very lonely." So when I saw this Time magazine cover, it says, "China's one-child crisis, why the world's most populous nation needs more people," I thought, well, China may be in a crisis in some way, but I never had a crisis in my childhood. I actually had a very good and to some extent spoiled childhood, and I get to be very close with my siblings and friends who are all the only child in the family. So this one-child policy was started in 1979, shortly after the Cultural Revolution in China. It was actually the national leaders with a group of mathematicians. They did some very complicated math and figured out that we can only have one child in a family to control population in China. And that lasted for 36 years. It controlled some population in China, but it also led to many other problems, including a drop in fertility rate, a very skewed male to female ratio, 1.5 to 1, and aging population. So last year, the nation decided to stop that and have a new policy called the TwoChild Policy. It controlled population, but it might create other problems. For example, women over 35 years old would have a second baby, and that leads to a lot of prenatal and postpartum problems. So with all these questions in mind, Dr. Jane Simoni, so she's a professor in clinical psychology in UW Seattle, with her long-term collaborators in China, came up with a project to start conversations of how we can address these problems with a new policy. And I was fortunate to be brought on board last year. So we visited places. This is an OBGYN hospital in Beijing, where we saw pregnant women and in active labor couldn't have a room, so they were lying on a stretch bed along the hallway, waiting to have a room. We gave presentations, we talked to collaborators about different things. Like I talked about sleep importance, and then Jen talked about mental health issues. And then this was a morning we were eating breakfast with our collaborators, and our topic was on the newspaper. So it says two children generation. So it's a new thing in China that we are looking into. So the March trip was just conversations with the potential collaborators. So I wanted to point out this lady in the middle. She's a chief nursing officer in a hospital in Shanghai. She was very on board and wanted to promote nursing research with us. So after we came back, she was the main collaborator we started working with. This is the truth of reality of international collaboration. There were many nighttime calls with the morning calls in China, and we talked and we applied to a grant, and Jen actually got a foreign expert award. So we went back in October, targeted in that hospital in Shanghai. So we talked to the floor nurses, we talked to the parents. This is mainly a pediatric hospital, so we focus on the pediatric units. And what we found out is that children are only allowed to see their parents for 5 minutes in the intensive care units in China. So this was a very old national policy. And when we left the pediatric units, when we opened the door, the parents would be peeking into the hallway trying to see their children. And you would see quilts and blankets over the floor because they slept in the waiting room every day, but they only get to see their children for 5 minutes every day. And this was stunning, and we interviewed the parents, the floor healthcare providers, and what we found out was that there's a worry of infection when the parents come in, and there's also a high patient-nurse ratio. It's 8-to-1 in nights in China, and here in the ICU it's 1-to-1. So big difference. It's open hallway instead of private rooms in the States, so very differently. And I was in a culture shock. It might sound weird that I'm in a culture shock of my own culture, but I was trained in the States, and the notion of family-centered care is so key here. Like, we involve families in the care, and that has many good outcomes. And family-centered care would align with the Chinese traditional values of, for example, familial piety. We put such an importance of family in our lives. But this no-visit policy really contradicts with that. So we wanted to do something about it. However, China is very different than the States. We're never going to have 1-to-1 nurse-patient ratio. We're never going to have private rooms. So what do we do? So the next steps are we're going to interview, assess the care environment, interview and look at the parent, provider, children's health, psychosocial health, and hopefully we'll come up with low-cost interventions to help to promote a China culturally tailored family-centered intervention to help them. So now we're back in Seattle, and it's back to those late evening calls with them. But this time, I think it's even more exciting that we are actually starting to do stuff and writing grants and doing things. So thank you.